Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a review of Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark. P. Djeli Clark is an amazing author, and his newest release, Ring Shout, is just as wonderful as all of his previous works. And I wanted to talk about all of the cool things that this book does. So first, let me tell you what the book is about. It is a historical sort of dark fantasy or horror set in the 1920s in Georgia. We follow a woman, Maurice, and her two other friends who are all Black women in the South that are fighting the good fight against not just racism, but monstrous racism. So where they are, the KKK is very active, and some members of the KKK are inhabited by these monsters called Ku Kluxes, which are from another dimension and are definitely on Earth to do some very, very bad things. But these three women can see the monsters inhabiting the humans, and they fight against them with magical swords and with dynamite and shotguns. They are very, very cool women, and they do such a great job of fighting against these monsters and racism. So this book has a lot of awesomeness, but also, I will warn, there's quite a few types of content that are difficult in this. There is a lot of violence. It does edge towards horror in quite a few areas with some gruesomeness in terms of body horror, things like that. There's also just a lot of content that is about racism, racial slurs, things like that. So just if you're going into that, know it ahead of time in case that those things aren't quite for you. So now let me tell you about all of the different ways that I thought this novella was just so amazing, starting with the language. I love the way that this was written. So these women are from the South, and the entire book is written in dialect. So we get the story from the perspective of Maurice, and everything that we read is very much in her voice. It's got this Southern dialect. There are also a lot of other characters who have different dialects. So we have a character who uses Gullah. We have a character who's from the Caribbean and has Caribbean patterns of speech. We have characters from Europe who have different patterns of speech. And the way that language and dialect is used and threaded throughout just give it such an amazing sense of who these characters are and what their experiences are through their use of language. Speaking of characters, the characters themselves were a huge part of why I loved this book. I became so attached to all of the different characters. I loved their personalities. They had such strong individual differences in their personalities. I really liked one of the main three women, Sadie, who was kind of difficult, and I loved her. She was just such a fun character. I loved the way that P. Djeli Clark writes women. He writes them so wonderfully. There's such strength and such complexity, such depth of emotion. It's just really wonderful the way that the characters are fleshed out in this. Even though it's a novella, I grew very, very attached, and I really loved the characters. Another thing I loved about the story that really is up my alley is the history. I loved the way that P. Djeli Clark worked in the history into this story. So obviously this is a historical setting because it's the 1920s in Georgia, although it's very nice because rather than the kind of, roaring 20s type of 20 setting, we get a very much everyday Black community setting. We get people who are dealing with the racism of the white people around them. We get people who are, going to the juke joint on Saturday night. We get people who go to the old woman who knows root magic in order to get help. There's just this wonderful sense of the 1920s from that perspective. There's also a lot of really important historical context that is woven into this, real life things that are woven into this. So things like The Birth of a Nation, which is this racist movie that came out and really spawned the KKK's resurgence, things like that. Or things like discussions about politics and a lot of the people within the Black community disagreeing about politics, or a European person who is talking about the importance of communism and a lot of the people in the Black community not really seeing the point of that it's not for them, and some people believing in Marcus Garvey and the idea of Black separatism. There's so many discussions in this that are really, really relevant for the 1920s that are woven in, and it's very much a part of this story. It's just so beautifully integrated. Another aspect that is woven throughout the whole story that I really loved is lore. There is so much throughout the whole story about heritage and stories and myths and magic. There's so much in here that is related to a lot of Southern beliefs and storytelling. So things like root magic, things like stories of the night doctors, who are these very much boogeymen who will come and get you and operate and experiment on you. There is also things like the ring shout itself, which is this spiritual dance and song that is done by a community and has these great powers of healing. And I just love the way that all of that is integrated into this. I also think it's really interesting that this story in many ways is a take on Lovecraft. So P. Djeli Clark has taken the idea of other dimensional beings who are very hungry and very dangerous coming into our own dimension and put his own twist on it and really used that to talk about some very interesting topics that are relevant to the South. And it's just so, so well done. And lastly, one of my truly favorite parts of this novella is the themes. I think that P. Djeli Clark does such an amazing job of taking a novella, which is quite short, making it not just something where you love the characters and the setting and the action, but also talks about some really important topics in a very complex and nuanced way. So in this, clearly because of the premise, we are talking about racism, but there's a lot of discussion of what causes racism and how does that affect people? How does it affect both the people who are racist and the people that they are racist against? How do we stop racism? What is sort of the nature of hatred? Why do we hate? What is the benefit of having that kind of strong emotion? What other options do we have? And if we're fighting against something as really awful as racism, where do we find our strength? How do we find power? How do we find sources of really the ways that we can fight against that? What are our tools? There's so many interesting discussions, and it's not clear cut. It's really a complex discussion, and there's a lot of things that go into that and a lot of discussions via the method of sort of fantasy to examine these very much real world topics. So I thoroughly enjoyed the way that that was explored in this novella. Overall, I think that Ring Shout is a truly standout novella. I think that it is beautifully written. It packs so much into such a small format. It's filled with action and great characters, beautiful writing, excellent myths and fantasy, and really delves into a lot of fantastic themes and topics. It is totally relevant to everything that's going on in the world today and gives us some more discussion and tools to think about it. So if you can handle the violence and the sort of goriness that part of this story goes into, I really truly think that this is worth picking up. I absolutely love it and I strongly recommend it. If you guys have read this book, or if you've read anything else by P. Djeli Clark, who I absolutely love, or if you have any thoughts or comments or recommendations, go ahead and leave me a comment down below.